Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today we have some spoilers for Campaign 4, so if you aren't caught up, I recommend clicking off and getting caught up. There's only 2 episodes, come on. It's not that hard. It's what, 8 hours? I feel like it's doable. Anyway, spoilers. So with the spoiler warning out of the way, we can now talk about the meat and potatoes of today's episode, or today's video, whatever the hell you want to call it, which is, we're going to be talking about Sam's character from Campaign 4, Wick, or just Wick for short. So realistically, something is up with this character. But before I get into talking about him, I do want to just talk about, stats for the characters in general, all 13, and we'll end with Sam so we can really wrap up the whole discussion on him. And I really kind of want to go over the many ways that people decide how they get stats in D&D, because I've seen a lot of people questioning how the hell these stats look the way they do, so I figured this would be a fun thing to talk about for today in conjunction with talking about Wick. So, let's get into it. So to my understanding of the D&D community, there are 3 top ranking ways to pick your character stats. So the first one is going to be standard array, where you get a 15, a 14, a 13, a 12, a 10, and an 8. These are all predetermined. You can't change any of these values, and then you just throw them in your character sheet and you pick your +1 and your +2, wherever the hell you want it to go. That is the, the default way, from what I understand, a lot of people did for their first characters. And then eventually, as you move forward, you can change it into other things. But this one's supposed to be the most safe, most balanced, because everyone's going to have roughly the same stats. After level 4, that could possibly change because somebody might take a feat, because somebody might choose to abandon their one, primary thing and start upping something else. So realistically, this is supposed to start the game where everyone's exactly the same as far as stats go, and standard array is supposed to be fixed points. You can't change anything. So after standard array, there are 2 more methods to sort of pick your stats or to get your stats. And these are the more customizable ways to do it, and honestly, these 2 are probably the ones that most people play with. Most people play with these ones, but standard array is sort of supposed to be your stock standard, your base, and then these ones sort of work off of that. So the next one is point buy, where you get 27 points, and it's based on a point chart. So if you have a score of 8, that's 0. So you don't have to spend any points on that. And then all the way up to 15, that's worth 9 points. So you have to spend 9 of your 27 points that you get total in order to buy a 15. So the way that you can do it is actually very mixed. It's sort of like standard array, where it's supposed to keep everyone in a roughly similar bracket, but you can customize it a lot better than previously. You can buy 3 15s and put them in your 3 relevant stats, and then just have a bunch of 8s in the other ones that you're just willing to dump. That's the sort of thing that you can do. You can have a couple 2 15s, a 13, a couple 8s, and you can really customize a character within this sort of bracket. And this for a long time was what I feel like most people were playing with. Now moving on to the next method, we have rolled. Now rolled is probably the most customizable, but it's also the most random, and you don't get to pick. So the thing with point buy is you really get to customize and pick your stats. With rolled, you don't have the luxury of picking. You mostly have to, you're stuck with what you get. It's more of a random draw, much like real life would be, which I think is why a lot of people like it, because it is very random in the way that it works. So how does it work? Well, you take a couple of D6s, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, and you roll them, you add them together, and bam, that's your stat. So you could roll, a 6, a 2, and a 4, and your stat would be 12. So there's a couple of ways that people have decided rolled should work. So there are some people who think you roll 3 D6s, you roll them all together, and that's your stat. There are some people who think you roll 4 D6s, you drop the lowest, add the rest together, and that's your stat. Now that's typically, from what I understand, how Critical Role used to do their stat rolling. They would do 4 and then take away the lowest. However, I heard recently from a couple of people on the internet, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that they do 5 D6s for this campaign, because this is something Brennan likes to do. So they did 5 D6s, take away the lowest 2, and then they add their stats together. So now, that's pretty interesting, and if that is the case, it is what it is. There is an additional rule that a lot of people put on rolled, and that is your score total has to be above or 70. It has to meet 70 or be above it, or you can re-roll, because then you're just going to have a character who's kind of shitty, their stat total is below 70. So that's not a great thing for some people to have, and to have it below that would mean you're truly weaker than the rest of the pack, especially when some people end up getting insanely high rolls and they end up having a character stat total in the 80s to 90 range, and they're basically gods at level 2. So that's not necessarily a good thing. either. And this is where I'm starting to like bring up the negativity of it, where there's some people who are going to be insane and cracked, and there are some people who are going to barely crack 70 and they're going to feel way more balanced. But that's the sort of beauty of it. Some people are born more excellent than others, I guess, in D&D, especially with the way that rolled works. But, you know, we don't know currently how it works. I'm pretty sure Robbie tweeted out that he did 4 D6s and dropped the lowest, but I'm not too sure. You know, that's just one. Maybe everyone had a different way to do it with Brennan, but I don't know. So with that being all wrapped up, we've talked about the 3 most common ways people use, and some of them vary in how many people use them, blah, blah, blah. So those are the most common ways. You have standard array, which I feel like is slowly dying off. You have point buy, which I feel like for a long time was like the winner of what people usually would do. And then you have rolled, which I feel like is overtaking a bit more in like the grand scope of things. And I feel like a lot more people kind of like it because it does make a lot more varied stuff. So with that all being said, you can then look at the Critical Role cast like stat sheets for all of these characters, and you'd be like, oh yeah, they're 100% rolled. Because you have some characters who are absolutely cracked with nothing with a negative modifier. Off the top of my head, Valus and Hal both have no negative stats, which I think is, you know, it can be fun, but I also think it's kind of boring. It very much leans you into like the jack of all trades thing where you can literally do whatever the hell you want. And with Hal eventually getting that ability, I would imagine like he's going to be even more broken, because I'm pretty sure Bard gets jack of all trades. I'm not looking at a book. I should be. But overall, I think this rolled can be a good thing if it's done well. And I feel like Critical Role is like the obvious, like they've already done it for years. They're going to do it well. But there are going to be times where I just, you know, compare things to like people playing regularly. There are going to be tables where if they play rolled, someone is going to become the person who just does everything, which I feel like can be boring, especially if you have stats that look like, you know, the way Valus and Hal does. Like, too many good stats are a bad thing. I personally think having a bad stat is a blessing, which is why I love Thimble's stat sheet compared to everyone else. I'm pretty sure she's the only one that has something as bad as 3 strength. But I think that's awesome for a million reasons. First and foremost, there's a lot of fun that's going to be had for when the character finally does something like strength based and they're able to succeed. Because normally, like, a character like that wouldn't be able to succeed on something strength-wise, but then they roll the natural 20, or they roll a DC high enough to where it's able to beat whatever Brennan's DC is. So realistically, occasionally, Thimble is going to be able to have this moment where she breaks the iron lock off the door and she's able to like work her way into the room and join everybody else for a fight. Or she's able to lift that, you know, wooden box off her being so she's able to step back into the fight again. Or, you know, something like that. She's able to move the thing out of the door so she can get everybody out of the burning building, right? That sort of thing will eventually happen, and it's going to be very satisfying for her to be like, you know, I've got the monster strength in me sometimes, right? That sort of thing will be very fun and very rewarding for a character with a low stat like that. However, the negative side of this is you look at the negative stat and you go, it's never going to work. I'm never going to bother working, which I think is kind of boring, which is kind of why I'm not a big fan of rolled myself. I accept rolled exists, and I've played in many games. My current character in a current campaign I'm playing in is a rolled character. But I just happen to think point buy is a little better because it keeps everybody in like the same bracket of strength. Everyone's roughly balanced within each other because you only had 27 points to pick from. Rolled could end up with someone having like 6 18s if you roll really well enough. You're really good at Yahtzee if that ends up happening, but straight up, there is a chance, however low it is, that you end up with 6 18s and you can multi-class into everything. You're just good at everything. Personally, I think being good at everything is a little boring, but that's for everyone else to decide on their own. I'm just sort of running over all of this, and it explains why the stats look the way they do, and I think it's actually very fun and very unique to see stats like this, but I'm always going to be someone who's like, seeing Thimble's stat makes me happy because this character isn't going to be able to do everything, versus seeing Valus, who could literally do whatever she wanted, and just do whatever the hell Ashley wants. There's going to be no stopping this character, barring a natural 1, realistically. But who knows? There's probably going to be a lot of fun with the character still. I think they're not going to abuse these powers, right? Like, the cast has never abused their really good stats in the past, and they've let other people shine. I have no issue with that. I'm merely just explaining how it could feel being a player at a table with somebody else that has these godlike stats. But who knows? Hopefully this doesn't happen, and hopefully people get their time to shine, and in Critical Role, it'll probably happen. So then we find ourselves at Wick. Now, this character is pretty interesting because much like both Liam's character and Abria's character, they were mentioned to have their class in a prior video, in the like what is campaign 4 video. There was a whiteboard that had Liam, Bard, that had Abria, Druid, and both of those came to be. Sam's name was also on that list, and it said Sorcerer. So a bunch of us, and just based off the look, it's very similar to Imogen, with like the weird colored hair, the glowing marks on his face, all this sort of stuff, and the same similar imagery to a sorcerer character that we had seen in the past, which many people assumed was like Sam's way of messing with Laura. We all assumed to see the character Wick have what's known as a sorcerer thing at the bottom of his like little stat sheet here during the first episode of campaign 4. This did not happen, and in fact, when the Wickander stat sheet popped up for the first time, all of us at the same time saw the 10 wisdom and saw the level 3 cleric and went, this does not match up. A cleric like main spellcasting modifier is based off the wisdom. So this, to a lot of people, immediately sent off a bunch of red flags. The alarms were going off. This doesn't make sense. And a bunch of awesome theories were born out of this small little thing. The 10, the cleric, doesn't make sense, doesn't match up. What is going on? Now, this wouldn't be the first time in Critical Role history that we've had a character lie about what kind of class they are. Chetney from Campaign 3 also lied about being a rogue, and it was eventually revealed that he was in fact a blood hunter, and his stats sort of betrayed that beforehand, right? His stats sort of revealed that there was something going on that was a little fishy with the character. So a lot of us are on the same sort of path of thinking when it comes to the Wickander character. So for me, there's been a couple of theories that I thought have been like really fun and really interesting to sort of delve down. So the first one being that he's actually some sort of warlock, not sorcerer or even a cleric. And I like this idea a lot based on the idea like he's got like the demons surrounding him, and like the family could have made a pact with the demons to sort of bring them in with the light and sort of show that they can fix anybody and like use their light for whatever purposes. But in fact, the demons are actually corrupting the family, which is maybe potentially leading to the execution of a character like Thiazi. So I think that's a really fun idea, and I think it's a really unique one because it would really lean into the idea that these noble families are corrupt, right? Corrupt things are corrupted, absolutely, blah blah blah. I like the idea that these demons, and we've met a couple of them now after episode 2, that these demons are in fact corrupting the family. And I think that's actually really fun because the idea of, Hal having a demon walking around with him who he isn't being corrupted by because she doesn't seem to want the same things as the others, I think is a really fun and really cool idea, because enmity clearly has some issues. And then we met Cruelty, who also clearly isn't, here for the people. They're here for their own self-preservation. And then you have Agony. That was the last one's name. So there's Tyranny, Enmity, Cruelty, and Agony, who seems at first to sort of be like some sort of fumbling klutz, but then sort of reveal that like they're willing to use, anybody at their disposal to further their own gains. So all three of them, the sisters of Tyranny, seem to be problematic individuals, and I think this does really lean into the idea of like the the Hallover family, I think it's Hallover. Sam's family are corrupted by these demons. I think it's a really cool and interesting idea. But the end of episode 2, in my opinion, really solidified what I believe Sam's character is going to truly end up being, and that is a divine soul sorcerer. So, to sort of get the cat out of the bag, at the end it was revealed that Sam's family's gifts of the light and everything like that comes from a fucking celestial in a Iron Maiden who gets their blood sucked from them like maple trees with the tap sticking out of their body. I think this is metal as fuck and really cool, but it also adds so many questions to this. Like, how are the demons related to this? And maybe the demons are the ones sort of giving them the answers on how they can suck the blood from this thing. But I just like the idea that like the blood is sort of fueling the family, and they're taking so much from this celestial within like this Iron Maiden sort of trap. But to me, depending on how long they've been doing this, how long their family has been like this, and how much their family has been consuming it, because based on how Wickander talks, they consume it a lot and even make it into tattoos, which is what is currently on his face. I wonder how much of this gift they have is something that's been around for how long, and I'm assuming not super long based off what Teor has been saying, like things have changed a lot since he was last there, which we don't know the exact timeline of things yet. I hope they put out a timeline of how long this stuff has been, but for me, this is really cool because it means that he wasn't like necessarily born with the powers of being a sorcerer, or he wasn't necessarily connected to magic when he was young. But as time has gone on and they've ingested more of this divine blood, this divine liquid, the light, as they've been so, referring to it as they've been drinking it more, what I think is really interesting is his body has sort of changed over time, and he has now been, given access to magic. Maybe we haven't even seen if he has magic yet or not, other than thaumaturgy, which is a cantrip, which even low level things can use. So realistically, we don't know to the extent of what kind of magic that Sam's character Wick has at this point in time. But what I do want to point out is something that I don't feel like too many people are talking about, and I think could sort of lead into like the whole corruption thing. It was stated in this episode that after the gods were killed off, the celestials and angels and all that sort of stuff went feral, right? So I think you don't even have to have the demons in this conversation right now. I feel like the blood of this feral angel, of which, by the way, I forgot a big component of, but I feel like the blood of this like feral angel could theoretically be enough to corrupt this family absolutely. Now, here's the thing, right? There's been a couple of things I've neglected to mention here. This celestial was by Sam's character's grandmother, Wick's grandmother, the photarch of the family, as she's so lovingly referred to as, claimed that was Wick's grandfather, which means there is a good chance that he actually was born a divine soul because he is part celestial, which for a lot of people has pointed them in the direction of calling Wick not human, but is in fact an Asimir, or an Asimar, depending on how you pronounce it, which I think is really fun too, because, the gods are dead, and it means that not all celestials are potentially, like, feral, because that would technically make him a celestial, which I think is really interesting, because not all of them going feral is pretty cool. Based on things and that sort of stuff. There's a huge theory still floating around this character, which I can't wait to sort of really crack into more of. But I just like everything that we're sort of connecting the dots of, right? He's got a celestial grandfather, but he is like at this point he'd be 1/4 of it, because his father would be half, and then depending on what his mother is, he would be 1/4, right? So he's like 1/4 celestial, which I think is really interesting as well. Somebody else pointed out the fact that like Wick's grandmother has to be fucking ancient for this to have happened, because, she would have to already be X amount of years to have a relationship with a celestial prior to the events of the Shaper's War, if that's where his father came from and it wasn't something entirely creepy that we don't need to go down right now. But the idea of Sam's father being born before the Shaper's War means that his father's already 70 plus years old, and on top of that, it means that it's very likely that Wickander's grandmother is old, like old for a human old, like possibly pushing 100 years old in D&D, which is old for a human, which, depending on what this divine blood is doing, could be keeping the character alive, which I think is rather interesting. The idea that this character could be ancient as well, like that's pretty interesting, because I don't think too many characters in the party were around for the Shaper War, right? I think it's implied most of them aren't that old. Like maybe Losa, who isn't even a player character, might be the only person who could have seen the Shaper's War, but then everyone else sort of underneath Losa wasn't that old. Like Theozi's not that old, Hal's not that old, a bunch of the other characters who are of that same sort of like age gap aren't that old. So these characters wouldn't be experiencing anything like that. So Wickander's grandmother is that old. She is that old, which is insane. Like, these are the Sundered Houses, right? Which means, did they fight alongside the gods? Did they fight alongside the other part? Like, we don't know everything about these families yet, which is kind of interesting. And now I'm going way off the beaten trail when we're talking about all this stuff. But that's how far this sort of thing goes. Like, how old his grandmother is. Was this angel feral before his grandmother had sexual relationships with this character to have Wick's father, which could be sketchy depending on how you want things to go in your mind, how far you're willing to think when it comes to that sort of relationship. If it was feral, if it's not, how did she feel watching him go feral? This is an insane theory. But at the end of the day, I feel like we can almost certainly say that Sam is a sorcerer. Divine Soul Sorcerer. I just feel like that is the only thing that really makes sense when you look at the character. But who knows? Because there was one comment that I read that said, I can absolutely see Sam playing a cleric with 10 wisdom. And I agree. Sam would absolutely troll that hard. So let me know what you guys think. I know I really went off on like a lot of tangents in this one because as I'm sort of, as I make these videos, I sort of connect dots and I talk about them openly. I really enjoy that aspect of these because I love reading comments about what people have to say. So for me, bringing all these like points in is really important for me to do, especially as I connect these dots. So I'm curious to know what you guys think about Sam's family, because the Hollover family, however the fuck Wick's family's last name is pronounced, I'm still learning these names. Like, I finally have Taconis down. I hope I'm saying that right after saying I finally have it down. But I'm still figuring out these names, so hopefully I can figure them out before the end of the campaign, only for us to be introduced to more character names for Campaign 5. But either way, I'm curious to know what you guys think about these ideas about what he could be. Do you think he's still a warlock? Do you think he's going to be a cleric? Do you think he's going to be a sorcerer? I personally truly am leaning towards Divine Soul Sorcerer. It just makes the most sense. And is he human or is he part Aesir? Like, I'm curious to know what you guys think about that as well. I am personally leaning towards the idea that he is 1/4 Aesir. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And he's like 3/4 human. I think that'd be really cool. And maybe he gets to be like, I don't know if like how far that could go if he's like a fallen Aesir, because all these like angels are fallen, like they're feral fallen angels. Who knows? Let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about this, and I will see you guys on Friday for the recap of episode 3 of Campaign 4. Peace.